Good morning and welcome to the latest in the series of the Flexible Space Association's Workspace Wisdom Webinars. I'm Jane Sartin, the Executive Director of FlexSA, and for today's webinar we're joined by Richard Powell, Director of FlexSA member Enexus Energy. So Richard's going to talk to us about the hot topic of energy costs with I think some better news than of late. At the end, we'll be able to take any questions you have, but if you think of anything as you're going along, please do pop that into the chat box and then we'll pick them up at the end of Richard's presentation. So I will just bring up the presentation and then leave Richard with you.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah, welcome everybody, and thank you for attending today. As Jane mentioned, my name is Richard Powell. I'm the Director of Enexus Energy. We're an energy consultant and service provider for the Flexible Space Association, and we help businesses reduce their energy costs. What I'd like to do today is give kind of a brief overview of what's happened in what has been the crazy world that is the energy market, and then what the outlook is, what prices are likely to do, and then really try and give some practical tips for what you can do as a flexible space operator in keeping energy costs low. And then hopefully, once we've finished, you'll leave this kind of with a better idea of what drives the energy market, and then hopefully that'll better arm you to keep your energy costs as low as possible going forward. But what we'll start with is a brief history of the energy crisis. Look, I don't want to spend too long on this. You've probably all had it up to here with hearing about the energy crisis. I know I have. But yeah, I think it's important to contextualize kind of what's gone before you can kind of speak about what's going on now. But the first thing to kind of know is that the world, and specifically Europe, is one big connected energy network. So what happens on kind of one side of the world can really affect our prices over here, and vice versa. And it's also important to know that energy is a tradable commodity. So prices are set by supply and demand and speculation on that supply and demand by traders. So if we kind of look at the graph here, what we've got of energy prices, this is actually gas prices throughout 2021, end of 2020 and into 2021. We came out of COVID. We saw historical lows in gas prices and electricity prices. That's because simply there was a lack of demand. Again, that supply and demand picture, people working from home, businesses were closing. There just really wasn't as much demand at all. Because of that, there was a load of, across the world, end-of-life generation and storage energy assets that were decommissioned early, just because it wasn't profitable to keep them open in a world where we weren't using as much energy. However, we all started coming back to work. Demand started picking up throughout 2021, and the worldwide energy market just wasn't ready for it. So closer to winter, the market got quite worried and prices spiked. And this is when we first started hearing in kind of autumn 2021, the term energy crisis. This is when it first started hitting the news. At the end of the day, we need gas to heat our homes, to run our businesses. So no matter how tight supply is, the UK is going to make sure that we get enough gas into the country so people can heat their homes. So there's more demand, therefore prices increase. And we saw in late 2021 record highs of prices. So we were seeing electricity rates above 20p a kilowatt hour for the first time ever, which seemed crazy and unsustainable at the time. But little did we know how things were going to turn out in 2022. So if you sort of see how high that spike is there, if we fast forward to the following year, that first arrowed spike there is what we've just seen in the last slide. So that's when we thought we were in an energy crisis. And then if you look at how high prices got in 2022, 2021 was nothing compared to what we saw. So I'll try and summarize a really complicated year of 2022 really quickly. Basically, we come out of a mild winter of 21 to 22, which was great. It means that we didn't use all the gas that we thought we were going to do, and prices started coming down. Fantastic. This is brilliant news. It looks like prices are going to come back down to more sensible levels. However, Mr. Putin thought it'd be a good idea to invade Ukraine, and also use gas as sort of a soft weapon in that conflict and not send it through Ukraine. Europe wasn't buying any Russian gas. Suddenly, there's a lot less gas for the world to get at. which means that prices started to spike in response to that conflict. So, yeah, already a tight supply and demand picture, and you remove Russian gas from that supply and demand picture, and it looks a lot worse. That wasn't the only bad news in 2022, though. It's the one that gets the most airtime, but we're already in an energy crisis anyway. That's just part of it. Add into that, the UK is quite fortunate that we get a lot of liquid natural gas into the country. And the USA stepped up to say, okay, you're not getting as much gas through Russia anymore. We'll send you some more LNG. Brilliant. That's great news for us. Prices start coming down after that initial spike. But then just a look, unrelated to any conflict, I think it's just a maintenance issue. There's an explosion at an LNG plant in America, which all that promised LNG basically gets taken off the table. So you've got less LNG coming into the country because of an explosion, a war in Ukraine, meaning loads of less gas into Europe. That supply-demand picture looks really, really bleak going into winter 22. So that's when we saw prices spike to the crazy levels, because there's a load of panic buying, basically, and speculation from the market that prices are going to just keep on increasing. So we reached crazy heights price-wise. How crazy? Well, we said in October 21 that prices hit around 20p, and we thought that was unsustainable. We saw prices for 12-month contracts above £1 a kilowatt hour for electricity, which is absolutely insane when you think that probably less than 2 years before, there were prices that were down at 12 to 13p. So yeah, huge increase, really, really bad. So that's a brief history of the energy crisis, really brief. What's happened since? Well, basically, we had a really mild winter 22 to 23. And prices tumbled. The worst fears of the market weren't realised. The market had basically overreacted, and prices have fallen to the point where today prices are essentially, for wholesale energy, are at a 2 to 2.5 year low. So what does that mean to you as a business? It means that if you've secured a price for your current rates anywhere in the last 2 to 2.5 years, there's a really good chance, if you were to look today, there'd be a decent saving compared to what you're paying at the moment, which is fantastic. No one thought we would get down this low from the highs where we were, so that's great. But the market is still very jumpy. It's a very, very volatile market. There was a couple of spikes throughout last year. I'll highlight the awful conflict in Israel and Gaza. That doesn't actually have any effect on UK supply demand at all, pretty much. But the market spiked probably 30 to 40% in response to it, just because the market's so nervous. So world events that not necessarily have an effect on our supply demand picture can really affect our prices. And like I say, there's just a lot of market nervousness. Fortunately, since then, kind of sense has prevailed in the UK energy market, and prices have continued to come down, which is brilliant. So what's the outlook moving forward? I think the one word for it is unpredictable, more so than ever. It's always an unpredictable market, but more so than ever. That being said, near term, all being well, we're expecting prices to stay low for this summer and perhaps into the winter, start of winter this year. There's excellent supply of LNG into the country now, after America's started sending it over again. Really high level of gas storage across Europe and the UK in preparation for next winter, and continuing record wind generation across the UK. There's been real good investment in wind generation, which is great. However, after that kind of near period into the medium term, it becomes a lot less clear. We've got this winter coming up. Since this new energy world, where there is just less energy to get at for different reasons, the UK hasn't experienced a cold winter. So we don't know how the UK would respond in a cold winter and how much gas we would have in reserve at the end of that. If we have a nice mild winter again this year, I would expect prices probably to fall a little bit, perhaps even from where they are now. Not by a great deal, but a little. If we have a cold winter and we use up a load of gas storage, then I would expect prices to move quite a bit higher than where they are today and probably stay there for a prolonged period. That would be kind of the new base level of where prices should be. But it really is dependent on this winter. Long term, again, really unpredictable. Anything can happen, but kind of some more macro things to be aware of is that there is an increase in large-scale storage in the UK and across Europe, particularly in the UK, wind generation offshore. There's a lot of investment in that. I think Europe and probably the world really has realised after the Ukraine conflict that you need to be less reliant on others for your energy. And that's actually moving towards a self-reliant model is really good. And it's going to hopefully smooth out those peaks that we saw throughout 2022. But one thing, that's sort of kind of good news, but one thing to look out for is the increase in electrification of the network. So if you think how many electric cars you see on the road today compared to 5 years ago, how many people are putting electric heating systems rather than gas, the network's just not ready for that. It needs reinforcing quite substantially. So there's going to be a cost borne probably on us to pay for that grid. And that'll be levied on us. So that might outweigh any kind of general decrease in wholesale prices. The grid charges may increase to kind of level that off. But I'd say in summary, near to medium term, we think prices will remain relatively low, but it's so unpredictable. And that unpredictability really comes from kind of geopolitical events. If you think how bad the market reacted to kind of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, that's something that couldn't really be predicted in the way it formed, and not something that we are in control of. And then if you go back a little bit further, you think the earthquakes and tsunami in Japan in 2011, that had a huge effect on energy prices at the time and was completely unpredictable and just completely changed prices overnight. And that's the sort of thing that if you've not got any prices secured or you don't know what your energy rates are going to be into the future, you're always at risk of some world event that you've no control of and can't predict affecting your prices. So that's kind of the outlook really, and what prices have done. So now we're in this new energy world. What can you do to kind of keep your costs as low as possible? There's three things you can affect if you break it down to its most basic. The cost of the energy you use, the amount of energy you use, and the amount you generate yourself. That's really what you're in control of. So if we tackle the first part of that, the cost of the energy you use, we're basically talking about effective procurement, making sure you pay as little for the kilowatt hours you use as possible. Now, the first thing is kind of not on this slide here, but it hopefully has been clear from the graphs. As the market is so volatile, when you decide to put your rates in place, that is the most important thing. Time into market, that is absolutely key. So making sure you pick the right day compared to the wrong day. Over the last 12 months, the prices have been as high as probably 50 to 60p a kilowatt hour for electricity. And today they're down at below probably 20p a kilowatt hour. So you're looking at 3 times the cost for the same product. So yeah, the timing is really, really key. But over and above that, what we've done here is kind of put together some do's and don'ts of practical tips of how you should approach purchasing your energy. The first thing I'll say is don't put your head in the sand. Know what your costs are going to be at least 12 months out. That'll help you with budgeting, and have a constant idea of what your next price will be at all times, because you don't want to kind of be surprised a month or two before your contract ends with, oh, you're having an increase of X%, because you might have already done all your budgeting, set your costs for your users, and then really that leave you in kind of a bad place. So always have a constant idea. Now, how do you do that? You test the market, and you do that by conducting a thorough tender each time you test the market as well. So there's probably 20 to 25 commercial energy suppliers that you can approach now. And generally what we find when we approach them all, because we do approach them all each time, is that you've got a pack of suppliers that are generally around 5 to 10% of each other. But then you'll have a few stragglers that are, could be 20, 30% out, way out on price, nowhere near kind of the cheapest offers. And then if you're lucky, you'll have 2 to 3 that are way out in front by a good 10% or so. So if you just go to your current supplier, say it's British Gas, and say, can I have a price please? If they happen to be one of those worst suppliers, you could be a good 30 to 40% out on why the best prices are. So that's why you conduct a thorough tender each time. I'll say the next don't would be don't rely on mainstream news for what's happening in the market at the moment. Look, Martin Lewis has talked a lot about energy prices, and he's fantastic. I think the guy's a hero, a national hero. I really do. He's brilliant. But when he's talking about energy prices and BBC or any other mainstream news outlet, they're generally talking about domestic pricing, and understandably so, that's their viewership. But domestic prices are about 4 to 6 months behind what's actually happened in the energy market. So if you're hearing on the news that the cap of domestic pricing is coming down, that's great, but actually that's happened 4 to 6 months ago and has no relation whatsoever to what's actually going on in the energy market for the commercial world right now. So it isn't giving you any relevant information. You need to go back to either sources that are reporting on commercial or testing the market, which is the better way. And then I would say make sure you do assess different contract structures as well. Being a business, you can potentially, depending on what your consumption patterns are, have access to different products than you do in the domestic world of just a normal fixed contract. Quite large consumers, for example, can have access to flexible purchasing, which would let you buy month to month. That would have been absolutely perfect during the energy crisis. Rather than buying for 12 or 24 months at the height of the market, you can basically track the market down month to month to month and follow that price down. There's also blend and extend contracts where you can secure a fixed price that can't go up and it can't go down, etc. It gives you an opportunity to renegotiate if the market does come down at a later date. But all these different contract structures, they've got different pros and cons. You need to work out what's best for you as a business, but do assess those. And I'd say don't be rigid with contract lengths. Take shorter term contracts when prices are high and longer term when prices are low. So be flexible with that. We work with a business that's based over here, but the head office is in Hungary. And the policy there that they've got as a business is just 12-month contract no matter what. Don't do that. You miss out on opportunities when prices are really low, and sometimes you can be stuck with high prices for longer than they need to be. So yeah, be really flexible with that. So that's kind of covered, some practical tips for procurement. But I'd say if I had to summarize it, one general thing to take away from today in general is be proactive with that procurement. It's really, really important. The thing is, being proactive takes time and it takes expertise. If you've got that in-house, great. You don't need us. But if you don't have that expertise and you don't have that time, then engage with an expert consultant, an energy consultant. Hopefully that's us, but if not, there's others out there. But find a reputable one like us, let them do the work for you and take their advice. So we said the first thing you can deal with and have an effect on is the cost of the kilowatt hours that you use. So let's move on to the next step, which is energy efficiency, being in charge of how much you use. If you use less, you spend less. This is quite difficult for flexible space operators because compared to, say, the manufacturing sector. In manufacturing, there's loads of low-hanging fruit in compressed air, over-spec motors, being able to use heat from process for heating. Flex space operators don't really have that luxury. So the gains are generally harder, but it can be categorized into three different categories, we believe. The first is building features, and then operational changes and behavioral changes. So we'll look at building features first. So the first and most obvious one is really obvious, but bears repeating. LED lighting. If you haven't switched over to LED, do it. You'll probably save about 70% of your lighting costs. Really, really easily done. We've seen businesses do it piece by piece. So when an old lamp fails, just buy a new one and do that kind of over so many years. Don't do that. Just do it all in one. You'll start saving straight away. Obviously, there's capital to that big job. That's easy. That's harder than kind of just a little bit of money every drip fed through over a certain number of years. But there's finance available that will be cheaper as a repayment than it would be than you'd save. So you're cash positive from day one. So just do it all in one. Next thing's heating. That's an expensive change. And generally, we find it's only cost effective if you're replacing an older end-of-life system. Say, for example, you've got an old boiler on its last legs. Try looking at air source heat pumps, or if you're a larger property, ground source heat pumps. They're about 3 times efficient as gas boilers. So it's really worth exploring. And we've seen some really good results with them. So definitely look at that. Long term, you will save money. And then lastly, what we call an efficient building envelope. So that is making sure that the good money you spend heating your property isn't going out of the window, literally. So that's taking steps for proper insulation, sealing air leaks, that's unsealed gaps and cracks in windows, doors, wall penetrations for plumbing. You'll be surprised the number of ways that cold air can come into a building and you can lose heat out of the building. A good exercise is literally send someone around, perhaps from the maintenance team. Send them around each room on a cold day, looking for where heat's being lost, corking the little gaps and cracks, really easy fix, and then taking note of the bigger issues like failing old double glazing or doors where it's really drafty, things like that. But these building features ones, other than LED, can be quite small fixes, but over a year they add up to quite a lot. So it's certainly worth taking those time to do those exercises. So the next one is operational changes. Again, it's hard to make gains here, but not impossible. Sensoring's a really easy and a pretty cheap one. Sensors for lighting, for example, you can usually get them thrown in for free on a larger LED fit out. They're really good for intermittent use rooms, so meeting rooms, bathrooms. That's a really good place to put sensors in. The amount of businesses we go and see, and we go in there and there's meeting room lights on 24 hours a day, or there's bathroom lights on 24 hours a day. Yeah, if you censor those rooms, you'll certainly find that you'll save money. And then the other one really is benchmarking. So that's using software to track what your consumption patterns are, either across days, weeks, months, or years. And even better, if you happen to be an operator that has a number of properties, you can then league table those properties and work out which is the most efficient and kind of replicate what the most efficient property is doing compared to the least efficient. Just as a really, really basic example of that, we work with a business that has 2 sites, and we were comparing the data of how they used. The usage patterns were really similar, except for at night. The smaller of the 2 sites was using a load of energy at night, and I hadn't identified it because it was a smaller site. And it worked out the reason for that night usage was they'd had a new efficient heating system put in, didn't really know how to work it, and it was heating the entire property overnight when it didn't need to and it was empty. Because no one was there. No one was there to tell them that heating was on. So it was only the data that identified that, literally the flick of a switch, and it saved thousands of pounds over a year. So yeah, that's a really kind of basic example, but at the end of the day, you don't know what you don't know. So using software to be able to track what your usage is can be really powerful, and then identifying areas where you can save money that way. And then lastly, in things you can do to reduce your energy consumption is behavioural changes. Again, really difficult for flexible space operators because your users might not be as invested as you to doing all the behaviours that you want them to do and to help you reduce your energy consumption. So that's, turning lights off, turning screens off, lowering radiators rather than just simply opening a window, things like that. It's about education. I guess that if your energy costs increase, the cost of the end user is probably going to increase the following year or whenever that might be. But it's about kind of educating the users, and I would guess that you will know your users much better than we would, and how you're best to kind of communicate that in a positive way. But with behavioural changes, operational and building, other than LED lighting, there's no low-hanging fruit. These are all generally going to be pretty small gains, but they do add up, and it is worth taking that time to do those exercises and make sure you're using as little energy as possible. And hopefully that's kind of given you a few tips as to things you can do to help reduce your energy consumption and spend a little bit less, and also save carbon as well. So we've talked about procurement, and we've talked about energy efficiency. The last thing I said was generating your own kind of, so you're not taking from the grid. Now, unlike small scale wind isn't really cost efficient anywhere, larger scale generation like CHP is probably not going to be viable in the flex space arena, but solar is absolutely fantastic. There's been a huge uptake on that recently. It's definitely worth looking at if you haven't assessed it before. The panel cost has come right down after a spike during the energy crisis. It's certainly worth revisiting if you perhaps thought it was a bit expensive then. And there's 3 ways really of implementing solar. You can either purchase it yourself, which is great. You buy the panels, someone installs them on your roof. You take the full benefit of the energy it generates instead of taking it from the grid. Brilliant. If you don't have the capital or don't want to spend that capital on it, then you can finance it. Generally, the finance agreements are 7 to 10 years. And you'll see that the finance repayment will probably be less than what you save from, not taking from the grid, from generating yourself. So you end up being cash positive from year 1. So yeah, that's a really good option, is finance. And lastly is power purchase agreements, PPAs. What that is you're basically renting out your roof space. You don't pay a penny for it. There's no outlay whatsoever. Someone comes and puts panels on your roof and it generates electricity. And then you buy the electricity from that generation that you need and pay a greatly reduced price for it. Full disclosure, I didn't used to like PPAs. Back before kind of the energy crisis, there wasn't much of a gap between the PPA price and the grid price. So there wasn't, you weren't getting that much benefit out of it. However, obviously prices have increased so much now, and the PPA price hasn't increased anywhere near as much, that there's a real big disparity there. As an example, we've got a company we work with whose electricity cost is 32p a kilowatt hour, and their PPA price is about 14p a kilowatt hour. So huge disparity there. So great benefit for them. And particularly for flexible space operators in general, solar is really good because your working hours where you consume your energy is probably going to be during daylight hours, which is when solar is going to be generating. So for flex space operators, solar is a really good fit, and absolutely go out and assess that if you can. So we've covered quite a lot there in a relatively short space of time, from the energy crisis to the current market, then the steps to keep your costs as low as possible. I think if I had to summarize it, I'd say that prices are more volatile than ever, so it's more important than ever to be in control of your energy costs. And the way you do that is to buy in a proactive way, reduce your consumption where you can, and generate your own. That's basically kind of the summary of what I would do to help keep your costs as low as possible. And before we finish, just on a slightly separate topic, I just want to have a quick word on green energy, because I know obviously green energy is a good thing. More businesses are looking to make use of green energy, which is great. But this year, the premiums are more expensive than ever. I think it's about 2p a kilowatt hour to buy green these days, which is like 10% of cost. The way green energy works is you can't decide what energy comes through your meter. There's going to be times when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing, and you're going to be getting kind of gas generated electricity rather than green energy. So what you do when you say to a supplier, I want green energy, they go out and buy the guarantees that your demand is going to go back into the grid from green sources. That's just how green energy works in the UK. Now, it can be cheaper to go and buy those guarantees yourself. And depending on how you report carbon, if you are reporting carbon, if you do want to buy green, it can be as much as even less than half the cost of just asking your supplier to go and buy green energy. You can go and buy those guarantees yourself. Basically exactly the same result, in some instances even greener, and less than half the cost. So definitely worth exploring. If you are looking at green energy, come and have a chat to us. We'll see what we can do in lowering that cost for you, because it is really expensive now to go green. But yeah, that basically covers it. We've covered a lot, like I said, and everything we've spoken about today, we can help with. If you would like to see if we can help you lower your costs as a business, we'd love to have a chat for you. We'd love to hear from you. But if not, I hope today's given you some valuable information and insight that helps you become as cost efficient as possible. But yeah, thank you very much for listening. And I'd like to open up if there's any questions. Please feel free to put that into the chat, and I'll do my best to answer.
Thank you very much, Richard. Now, I know you've got a slide with your contact details on. Do you want to just put that on?
Yes, thank you.
So I just do the promotion for you. Yeah. So we'll leave that on for a moment, just so that people can take those details down. You're also on the service provider page of our website as well. So still time for some questions. We've got one that's come in, which I think you probably, at the time this came in, you covered a little bit on this yourself. about contracts. So I suppose it's contract dates. We don't get to choose which date we change supplier, or can we? Is the question. I think you talked about shorter contracts, but
yeah, I think what they're referring to there is obviously if you've got a contract end date and the market's at a certain point, then you're kind of stuck there. But that's kind of the point in being proactive. You can secure today's rates to start 12 months, 2 years down the line if you want to. And generally, we find the best results come from actually securing a price in advance of your renewal date by a decent amount.
Okay. So during your presentation, and thank you for covering quite so much in a very succinct way, you mentioned UK gas storage and demand a couple of times. Is that relevant to a business that only uses electricity?
Yeah, it is. So basically, I refer to gas quite a lot there. The reason being is that still about 50%, maybe 40% now of UK's electricity comes from gas. So basically, whatever the gas market does, the electricity market does. They follow each other so closely that you pretty much end up just talking about the gas market.
Okay. And a question which I know has come in from the person that put the original question in, which is primarily around, is there any way of negotiating an early end to current contracts because they've got a 3-year contract?
Potentially, I'd have to see the example. In some instances, it will be no. The agreement will be the agreement, but there are instances where the supplier will be a little bit more flexible, and there's other ways. I think we have to kind of speak about the specific circumstance. The question they mentioned was that the alternative was a shorter term one at 80p. So I get why they've done that longer term one. But yeah, I think we'd have to see the specific circumstances, but there are sometimes ways in working with the supplier to be a bit more flexible.
Okay. And we've been asked if we can share your presentation, which I'm sure we can do. We'll do that to everyone that's signed up. Now, understandably and rightly, you focused on business energy matters, but of course everyone's interested as well. You did mention domestic prices, and you said that they're several months behind what's happening in the market. Mm-hmm. Why is that?
That's kind of a function of suppliers have got a much bigger domestic portfolio, so it's a lot harder to change those prices, and also it's bad PR at the end of the day. If you put your prices up and you're the first ones to take that leap, then supplier, you kind of, your British Gas, you look bad compared to EDF, and people will start running to EDF or whoever it may be. The suppliers don't want to change prices, so they keep it. It used to be at a relatively uncompetitive level, but obviously the caps change that now. But they don't want to change it very often, so they don't. So they kind of wait to see what the market does. That's kind of the short response to that question.
Now we've been asked about the cost of using Enexus. Is there anything you can sort of say on that on general terms? I'm sure it varies.
Yeah, it will be different depending on complexity, but we have a fee that's generally built into the unit rate. Depending on the complexity, it will be different, but we average about 0.5 pence a kilowatt hour, which is quite reasonable compared to the market, and we're quite transparent about that, whereas there's a lot of other operators in our space aren't as transparent about that. But we think we're very good value for our fee.
Yeah. Now, perhaps finally, unless anyone gets in with any last minute questions, what sort of rates are achievable today?
So if you were looking at electricity prices, you're probably in the region of a half hourly metered supply, probably in the region of about 19 to 20 pence a kilowatt hour. Depending on where you are and how you use your energy, it could be a little bit more, a little bit less. Gas, we've seen prices right the way down at about 3.5p a kilowatt hour recently. More commonly around 4p, but yeah, 3.5 to 4p. If you compare that to the peaks of the energy market, we saw gas at 25p a kilowatt hour. So huge reduction, and kind of getting back towards a normal gas price now. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, Richard. That's been really helpful. We will share your slides. We'll also make available a copy of this webinar on our YouTube channel, and we'll share the link to that as well, so that anyone can check in on the detail and share it with any colleagues as well that it might be useful to. We've got a number of Workspace Wisdom webinars in the planning. We've got a couple scheduled for the next couple of months, one on neurodiversity in the workplace, another on employee benefits. I know we're just trying to firm up a date for one relating to mental health. Any other topics that anyone thinks it would be good for us to cover, please do get in touch with FlexSA and suggest. We're keen to keep this going throughout the year. Lots of other events coming up as well, including our annual conference and exhibition on the 14th of May in London. But do keep an eye on the events page of our website for details of things happening right across the UK. We've got a number of roundtable meetings and workspace tours scheduled as well. So finally, thank you, Richard. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.